Not yet, but I'm getting close. Harley Quinn tried to slow me down, dropped an elevator on me.
Did it work?
Of course not. I'll get back to you when I reach the end of the trail.
Releasing on August 25th, 2009, with Batman fever at an all-time high thanks to the release of the beloved Dark Knight just a year prior, Batman Arkham Asylum was Rocksteady Studios' first entry into the world of everyone's favorite brooding superhero detective. Releasing to near universal critical acclaim and winning awards for everything from gameplay and graphics to story and sound design, Batman Arkham Asylum was an instant success and would go on to spawn multiple sequels and even an expanded franchise into other games, comics, novels, and an animated film, cementing a firm position in the DC expanded universe. Okay, for most people watching this video, this is all stuff you already know. And if you're new to the game, then there's a little bit of history for you. I know I personally, still to this day, consider this one of the best series of all time. With that said, I haven't actually played any of them since release, and that's what brings us here today. I know in my nostalgia brain, Arkham Asylum is probably the best ever representation, at least in games, of my personal favorite superhero. But much like the Joker, nostalgia has a way of fucking with your head. So, with that in mind, I took to the task of replaying Arkham Asylum to answer the important question, does it hold up? Now, when reviewing the merits and quality of a game that was released over a decade ago, it's important to remember that games, possibly more than any other medium, are inextricably linked to the technology of their time, and technology advances at a rapid clip. So to help alleviate a little of this, I've decided that I'd break this video into pillars that, in my opinion, sort of transcend much of the technological limitations while representing the core aspects that can make or break a video game. These pillars are going to be story, presentation, and gameplay. Now, let's get to the story. Loosely based on the events of the 1989 novel Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth by Grant Morrison, Batman Arkham Asylum was written by comic veteran Paul Dini and tells the story of Batman as he fights his way through the grounds of Arkham Asylum to stop the Joker who has broken free the prisoners and put them to work on his next Gotham-destroying nightmare weapon. The game opens on a dramatic night shot of the bat signal as the camera slowly pans down to show the dark, gothic alleyways of Gotham City. Police radio chatters stating that the Batman has the Joker in custody and is headed to Arkham Asylum. Immediately, our hero shoots down the alley in the Batmobile, the crowned prince of crime laughing his head off in the back seat. We then cut to the inside of Arkham, doors open, and Batman leads the Joker down the hall to Warden Sharp, where banter ensues as they strap the Joker into a gurney and the cutscene transitions to gameplay. Okay, I don't plan to describe too much of the story in this game. If you want to watch a breakdown of the whole story, there are plenty of sources for that. But this cutscene, this intro cutscene, and the kind of bit that's following up afterwards sort of represents, in my opinion, some of the greatest strengths of this game's story. And I'll be coming back to it for examples as I continue. So for now, let's just say that for the first time I played through this upcoming bit, I did so with a big old smile on my face because I knew I was in store for something real special. And those same feelings came back this time. So let's go back to the intro. Back to the opening, and now in control of the Batman, the player makes their way slowly down the hall, following Sharp and the Joker to ensure transfer of custody goes accordingly. Along the route, the player is introduced to the world of Arkham Asylum as you walk past inmates, doctors, and security alike. At one point, the party is stopped, waiting for an elevator. As the elevator approaches, you hear loud banging and some snarling. You can see the elevator straining to support whatever is inside. The elevator eventually arrives, and the doors open to reveal a monstrous and horrifying Killer Croc, who doesn't waste a moment to toss a verbal threat at the Batman before moving along down the hall. At this point, the Joker and a handful of guards get in the elevator and begin the descent to the lower detention levels, while a video of Sharp continues to play on the elevator TVs, providing some background on Arkham. After a brief power surge and a "will the Joker try to escape" scare, the elevator completes its journey as the party reaches the processing center where Jim Gordon greets Batman. Batman comments that the capture was too easy as the Joker is brought into an airlock room, finally separated from his nemesis. This is when the other shoe drops. Separated from the bats, the Joker pretends to trip and quickly incapacitates his guard. Looking up at the security camera, he yells, "Honey, I'm home." The camera cuts to a security room where we see none other than Harley Quinn at the console, where she swipes a card, unlocking the doors behind Joker. The lunatics are now in control of the asylum. Alright, that's where we're going to stop for now. The story in this game is, in my opinion, some of the best Batman writing outside of the comics, and something that is really worth experiencing for yourself. I can't promise there won't be any more spoilers going forward, but I will refrain from going into any more scene-by-scene detail. Let's start with world building. World building in a comic book-based game or movie can be tough, as fans of the IP want to see examples from the worlds they love in order to feel more connected and engaged with the experience. While having too much can result in an experience that's overly dense with characters and references that can be confusing and off-putting to newcomers of the IP. Arkham Asylum, however, seems to pull this off in a way that feels so natural that it seems almost effortless, by tying world building into every aspect of the game. So much so that it will come up in almost every section of this video, but for now, let's look at how they use story and writing to build the world using the intro as an example. The tone is immediately set with the first shot, opening on the night sky, a full moon, mostly obscured by dark clouds and pouring rain as the bat signal is turned on, shining brightly in the clouds above. The camera then slowly pans down, first revealing a stone angel, looking at first like a tombstone, but as the camera continues its descent, reveals itself to be a statue atop a Gothic cathedral. We simultaneously see Gotham's skyline reveal itself, eventually settling on a shot of a claustrophobic Gotham street, where we see police cruisers speed into the city, followed immediately by the Batmobile zooming the opposite way. While this is happening, we hear over the police radio that Batman has the Joker and is taking him into custody. Where this scene succeeds, and where the game will continue to succeed throughout, is that on the top of providing important setup information for the main story itself, it is also providing contextual world building to the Batman fans and newcomers alike. To the newbie, it's serving as an introduction to Gotham City and the Batman. It's obviously not providing the detail of a full-on origin story, but it's giving the important bits. Over the course of these few minutes, the viewer sees the dark, Gothic atmosphere of Gotham. They see the beautiful skyline juxtaposed against the tight streets of the slums, all framed by a Gothic cathedral with an angel above and surrounded by gargoyles. They learn, at the very least, the Batman is working with the police, and whoever this Joker character is, he seems like a pretty important criminal. To the Batman fan, however, this scene is telling them much different information. First off, rather than introducing us to Gotham, it's using the same visual language to show us what Gotham this is. To me, this shows a strong understanding of the material on part of the creators, as a fan of Batman would know that the aesthetic of the city, in a well-told Batman, is an expression of the Batman himself, and Gotham is as much of a character with nuance and intent from writer to writer as Bruce Wayne. Personally, when I first saw the shot of Gotham, I saw influences from the animated series, with the Burton series, and a splash of Nolan, and immediately had an idea what type of Batman I was in store for. The police radio, on the other hand, told fans when, in relative time of a Batman story, this arc takes place, as it established that Batman is working with the police in a pretty direct manner, and likely has been for some time. This means that Arkham could have just about anyone locked up inside. This type of multi-level or contextual world building continues throughout the intro and throughout the game. The slow walk with the Joker is full of this, establishing all the details a newcomer needs to know about Arkham Asylum, its architecture, its history, its inmates, its culture, the list goes on, while also providing details for the hardcore fans about where their favorite characters are, what versions of these characters to expect, and giving clues about where the story may go from here. Speaking of characters, let's talk characterization.
Stop me once and for all! Oh, you're getting too predictable, Bats. Well, I'd love to stay and chat, but I have a party to organize. I've got guests flying in from all over Arkham. You'll see.
Now, to be fair, the game cheats a little bit in this department, but in the best way possible, so I'm not going to ding them for that. What I mean when I say that is that when casting the voices for this game, rather than reinvent the wheel, they looked at my personal holy grail, Batman adaptations, Batman the Animated Series. At the top of this list is the casting of Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne, Batman, and the undeniable Mark Hamill as the Joker. Not only do they return in their original vocal form, the writing for these and all of the Rogues Gallery feel like an evolution of those same characters from that series. Only a little more adult, a little more refined, without losing their cartoonish charm. So much so that this could very well exist in the same universe. There are a few exceptions. Zaz in particular comes to mind as a character that feels phoned in both writing and performance.
I see anything that looks even a little bit like a bat, and this guard dies. Do you hear me?
But outside of the rare exception, every main character, hero, or villain feels lovingly written by someone who understands the character and has vision and intent for their actions. The last bit that I feel the story excels at is pacing. This game moves and it doesn't stop. At roughly 12 hours, the story is paced just right to perfectly complement the available gameplay while never feeling like it's rushing or overstaying its welcome with filler. Being that the game's structure borrows a lot from Metroidvanias, the story needs to rationalize backtracking and looping back through areas. This is a rough thing to do, but I would say it succeeds far more often than it fails at making those backtracks feel natural and interesting. And the best part is that it accomplishes all of this without any real info dumps, outside of the optional collectibles, obviously. Nothing is perfect, however, and while I'm not ashamed to say I enjoyed the story beginning to end, there are some things that didn't work for me. Escalation is a common struggle in games writing, as it's hard to make engaging gameplay for subtle conflicts, and Arkham Asylum struggles with this just like many games before it and many since. For the first few acts of the game, the conflict is very personal. Taking the Joker at face value up to that point, his goal is essentially to drive Batman to kill. It's a classic Joker premise and shares that of Arkham Asylum graphic novel. A recurring theme with the Joker is that he's trying to prove that Batman is crazy, just like him, and just hasn't snapped yet. It's his classic one bad day shtick, and it's dark and terrifying because of how personal and deep it is. I love when writers explore this conflict between Batman and the Joker, and was very excited to see that type of conflict explored in a game's story. Then the third act hits, and the Joker's real plan is revealed. He's going to release his Titan toxin into the water supply, turning the city into super mutants. It became clear at that point that, when faced with the option of having the final boss battle be a battle of wills as Batman resists his desire to kill the Joker,
You just couldn't let me go, could you?
or have it be a badass action-packed battle royale where you fight hordes of enemies and a hulked-up Joker that keeps leaving the fight to mug for a news camera, they focus tested. They chose to go with the latter, out of complete free will. Don't get me wrong, that's totally a thing the Joker would do and was fun. I just like those deeper stories when these two characters are involved.
Beat me. I'm actually going to win. Ready for the next round? Always. What?
Also, like any comic book or video game story for that matter, it's definitely not without its leaps of logic. Why did Batman leave most of his tool belt at home? Why did they only send one guard into the airlock with the Joker? Why did I take Zaz out in the first tutorial, yet people continue to call him a terrifying threat throughout the entire game? These are really nitpicks though, especially given the subject matter. At the end of the day, the story is really fun, keeps up the whole way through, and feels at the end like a solid arc of the animated series or a graphic novel. I loved it. With a AAA budget and an all-star cast of designers, creators, and talent, this game was set up for success when it comes to presentation, and boy did it succeed. Running on Unreal Engine 3, they used some of the best tech available at the time to craft a game that's still beautiful to look at today, if a little dated. Crafted with the intricacy of a Metroidvania map, the density of a Skyrim village, and the detail of a Halo mission, the Arkham grounds and the buildings that reside within it are a sight to behold and a character unto itself. As you move throughout the story, you are taken in and out of the various buildings and zones throughout the Arkham grounds. The realization will happen at different points for everyone. For me, it was around the transition into Act 2. But eventually, you will realize that while you play as Batman trying to stop the Joker, the inmates continue to do their work to execute the Joker's plans. And this is shown to us in no better way than the Arkham grounds themselves. As you progress and move between the buildings, you will slowly and progressively see that grounds are changing, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in major, but all in service of presenting a world that is moving outside of Batman's bubble. A plan is in motion, and even though you don't know what it is, you can see its progress in the world. I've already mentioned the cast, but I'll take this moment to bring up once more the voice acting in this game. Fully voice acted, the game is chock full of wonderful performances with rarely a dud. Looking at you again, Zaz. In nearly every instance, the vocal performances feel alive and full of the right kind of energy. And what can I say? I'm just a huge Hamill Joker fanboy. I could listen to that madman all day.
Hey, what a riot! And speaking of riots, here's a bit of civil unrest I cooked up just for you.
Where the vocal performances feel like great throwbacks with darker undertones, the character design is a relatively fresh take. Wanting to pay homage to some of the team's favorite comic series while also trying to add some bits of real-world grounding, they ended up somewhere between the comic representations we see in Jim Lee and Alan Moore books and the almost hyper-realistic approach that Christopher Nolan uses in his Dark Knight series. I'm a big fan of the look and, well, for the most part.
Do you hear me?
UI, on the other hand, to use a forbidden term, is a mixed bag. The HUD is excellent, all the information you need is presented in an easy-to-read manner while feeling skeuomorphically appropriate. Detective mode is a classic and something you will have on most of the time. This is a double-edged sword, however, as the filter that it applies means that you will easily spot enemies and interactables, but you'll miss out on all the really cool dope level design. All the art and everything is obscured by the blue filter, which is... I personally found this a bit frustrating, and I found myself doing my very best not to use this super useful feature as much as possible. Menu UI, on the other hand, is kind of rough. It feels like something that was supposed to get another pass but never did. The upgrade menu, for example, is just kind of a list of things that don't really have any order to them. I mean, it gets the job done, but a lot more could have been done to inform the player when making these important choices about what to upgrade next. The tight camera when out of combat made me feel a little overly constricted, and the reduced field of view felt claustrophobic in a way that I didn't feel added anything really to the game. Probably the biggest sin the game commits, however, on the presentation front is its overuse of slow motion. Slow-mo can be cool sometimes, and sometimes it can enhance gameplay. Unfortunately, this game uses slow-mo a lot, and I'd say like 80% of the time it does neither. In fact, there were more situations than I can count where the slow-mo not only didn't enhance my gameplay, it also caused me to mistime some button presses a little bit and mess up. I can't remember if they reduced the slow motion in future games in the series, but I really hope they do. Lastly, we have the sound design. I'll keep this short. It's great. Again, wearing its inspiration on its sleeves in a good way, the score has Nolan-esque dramatic undertones at one moment and swells into high-tempo Elfman-like instrumentals the next. It's fun and dramatic and works really well. Like I said at the top, this game comes from a AAA team with AAA money, and they spared no expense. Now for the third and arguably the most important pillar of quality when we're talking about a video game, gameplay. Let's start by breaking down the structure and the loops. As I mentioned before, Arkham Asylum borrows heavily from the Metroidvanias in terms of structure. By laying out the world as a group of buildings connected by an open-world grounds area, you create the illusion of openness while in reality crafting a relatively linear experience. On paper, the player is simply hopping back and forth between 3 or 4 buildings. However, every time you return to an area, it's a whole new experience, as you now have new tools or the environment has been altered in such a way that your path through the area and the challenges that await are entirely different than your last time through. It's a difficult thing to accomplish, but when done right, allows a team to squeeze an incredible amount of life out of a limited number of assets. And this game is a masterclass in that type of design. So that's the structure. What's the actual game? What are the modes of play or loops? We've talked about traversal. That part is pretty self-explanatory. While the traversal between buildings is important for story and world building, it doesn't offer much gameplay outside of a few collectibles and a small smattering of enemies. What it serves mostly is as a bit of downtime, some breathing room between the three primary types of encounters that you'll see, which include traversal puzzles, combat puzzles, and combat arenas. With these encounter types laid out, let's now break down their loops. Each of these encounter types can break down into the same basic loop: investigation, planning, and execution. Let's begin with the traversal puzzles. Traversal puzzles are fairly limited in this game, but do serve to break up the action a bit. Generally speaking, a traversal puzzle consists of Batman being in a room with no obvious escape and needing to navigate his way out. These puzzles are generally about challenging the player's understanding of the available moveset and toolkit to hack security doors, blow up walls, zipline, etc. in order to make their escape. This loop generally plays out as follows. The investigate phase of traversal puzzles is done by using detective mode to gather information. By scanning around the room, you will quickly be able to determine what path you need to take and what you need to do to accomplish it. Planning is then done by using that information that you just gathered to plan your route and prepare your gadgets accordingly. From then, you move on to execution, which is just as simple as doing what you just planned. Like I said, this is the least common encounter type, and for good reason. While interesting and fun to see Batman doing some detecting, the toolkit and moveset was clearly built around combat first, and Batman simply can't do enough things to make these puzzles all that challenging or engaging. Next up, in terms of encounter types, is combat puzzles. Combat puzzles, unlike the arenas I'll mention later, are about focusing heavily on the investigation and planning steps in the loop, as an all-out assault would end in a quick end for Batman. In these sections, we see Batman needing to disable a room full of enemies in which one or even the whole room is armed. You see, unlike some depictions of the Batman, this Bruce is strong and powerful and badass, but very much not bulletproof. Even just one enemy with a gun is enough to turn the nightmare of Gotham's underworld into Swiss cheese. So in these encounters, perfect execution to a well-laid plan is tantamount to success. First off, the investigation phase. Once again, using detective mode, the player gathers all the information they can about their situation. As soon as you pop it, the HUD gives a target readout letting you know how many hostiles there are and how many are armed. Skeletal silhouettes are highlighted red for armed enemies, and all your options for escape and stealth are in yellow. Taking stock of this information is huge. Gargoyle placement, for example, is important to note, not only so you know where to safely stalk your prey from, but once you get into action, you want to be sure all of your on-the-ground fighting is within line of sight of a gargoyle for when you need to make a quick escape if things go wrong. Every bit of information on screen when in detective mode is useful here, and should be studied carefully. With that information in hand, it's time to plan. For combat puzzles, this is the most important part to get right. Using what you just gathered, determine how you will proceed. In this phase, you are choosing the order in which you will take out your enemies, prepare traps or distractions, and prepare escape routes if your attack doesn't go according to plan. Due to the nature of these encounters and the changing AI behavior as they become more anxious, this phase will likely have to be revisited multiple times during the encounter as you slowly whittle away the enemies and have to replan. In this mode, Batman is a silent hunter stalking his prey, and they do a great job through gameplay making you feel like the Batman in this moment. The balance of risk of a swift death to an unnoticed shotgun versus the visceral thrill of watching your enemies become more and more terrified as you, unseen to them, take them out one by one creates a war of anxiety and power fantasy that is just mwah. So, you've made your plan. It can be as simple as a hanging takedown as a guard passes below, or as complex as a sonic batarang luring enemies towards an exploding wall while you glide kick the distracted onlookers. It's all useless unless you execute as planned. This, as would be expected, comes down to understanding the controls and, well, not fucking up. While the melee combat responsiveness can sometimes be questionable, executing things like dive kicks and batarangs are made really simple and rewarding. In these instances, the threat is really a bad plan or missed information than it is perfect execution. Generally speaking, if you fail one of these encounters, it's because of one of those first two stages going wrong. One note I will make here is that, for me, the weapon wheel feels a little inaccurate or sensitive. I'm not sure what it is, but I did find myself selecting the wrong gadget from time to time when things went wrong and I had to get into heavy combat. It's not because I was aiming for the wrong direction or anything, it just was that the wheel is a little finicky. That said, if your plan is right, execution will generally go smoothly, quickly, and with little actual interaction, to be honest. This may sound like weak gameplay, but as a reward for careful planning, its simplicity makes the player feel extremely powerful, even if they didn't do much with their controller. On the other end, however, is the arena combat encounters. Making up the majority of this game encounters, arena combat represents not only the core of the game, but really Rocksteady's contribution to gaming's future going forward. Leading up to release, much of the buzz around Arkham Asylum was around the fascinating new approach to third-person brawling combat that they had come up with. Dubbed Free Flow, Rocksteady replaces the traditional moves-based combat systems found in games previously with something more akin to the combo-based systems found in fighting games and the timing elements found in rhythm games or QuickTime events. What results is a combat system that focuses more on flow state, rhythm, and timing over marionette-like direct control. Not many buttons are actually involved in combat. At its core, it's just attack, counter, and dodge. But if you make any mistakes on your timing, or press the attack when you should counter, or counter an attack when you should dodge, the game will punish you, and punish you quickly. Before the game even released, the combat was already pretty highly acclaimed, providing exactly the heavy-hitting power fantasy you expect out of a Batman, with a level of challenges that punishes you for not paying attention. How friggin' Batman is that? I mean, Batman's power relies on his strength, his tools, and how he executes them. If he slips up at any point, he's dead. The only reason he isn't dead is because he doesn't slip up. And when he's not slipping up, he's making it look easy. The combat system has all of that and would continue to be borrowed in action games to this very day. Now that we've explained free flow combat, how does our investigate, plan, and execute loop work within the arena encounters? Well, generally speaking, arena encounters are all about melee fighting a group of enemies. Sometimes just a small pack, sometimes it's respawning hordes, but regardless, in these encounters, the loop runs constantly, each step taking place in a split second. In these encounters, the player is challenged with using these concepts in real time with every button press. So, we've entered a new room. We got a brief cutscene showing all the enemies ready to pounce, and then as soon as we regain control, it's time to act. Investigation rarely uses detective mode here. Due to the tighter arenas, lack of escape options, and visual clues given in-world and in HUD, detective mode is actually more of a hindrance here. Instead, investigation is an ongoing process of paying attention to who is in the room and what is coming at you. Take note of enemy types, weapons, projectiles, weapon boxes you need to defend, incoming attacks, and environmental hazards. Then planning is entirely about using all that information and determining what you will do in response. About to be punched, hit the counter button. About to be stabbed, pocket sand. Incoming projectile, dodge. No incoming attacks, determine the greatest threat and punch him. Mess up any of these, and it doesn't matter how good your execution is, you'll be punished. Once you know what you're going to do, execution is pretty straightforward. You decide you're going to punch the biggest guy, so do it. You decide you're going to dodge, dodge. The loop starts over again as soon as you hit that button, bringing you back to investigation. Alright, so we've talked about the different encounter types and loops that make up the core gameplay of Arkham Asylum. So the important question is, does its gameplay still hold up in 2021? Well, with a giant smile on my face, I can say a resounding yes, and for me that comes down to two core reasons that we covered. First off, there's free flow. Rocksteady struck on something truly special when they first conceived of this combat system. Now I know there's all kinds of arguments about who really conceived of this first, but Rocksteady really did popularize it and really perfect it, and any kind of similarities that happened before I think are mostly coincidental. At this time it was considered new and revolutionary, and I think the truest testament to it and its level of quality is that 12 years later it is not only still inspiring combat systems from Shadow of Mordor to Marvel's Spider-Man, but still competes with them to this day, and in my opinion is still probably one of the best examples of that type of combat. It is too much slow motion, and animation timings would get better as the series move on. But the core feel and intensity of the combat is just as fun today as it was back then. I still feel like I'm wearing the cowl and beating enemies senseless every time I play. I feel like Batman. That said, a combat system, and even an amazing one, can only take gameplay so far. What's just important as the systems are the loops that contain them. If the loops aren't interesting, if they don't reinforce the core goals and values of the game, then it ends up removing the players from the experience or killing the fantasy, or they just kill off great systems through overuse. And that brings us to the second reason the gameplay is still great in 2021 and why I spent so long explaining the loops earlier. This game is about being Batman, and everything in it serves one purpose and one purpose alone: make the player Batman. This includes the story, the visual language, the sound design, the combat design, and most importantly to me, the loop design. When describing loops, designers tend to break them down to verbs that describe the actions that the player does. In this case, these verbs are investigate, plan, and execute. These very same verbs can be used to describe the actions of our favorite Caped Crusader from any of the media we may be coming from. These loops work so well because they are formed to reinforce the fact that you, the player, are Batman.
I'm Batman.
They take the encounters that are, thanks to narrative and story, all things that Batman would do, like puzzle solving, arena combat, stealth combat, and then using these loops allow you to do them how the Batman would do them. Everything about the design, from the loops to the systems, show a clear goal and a unified vision for the player experience, resulting in a tight, clean gameplay that just feels great every time you go back. Whew, that was a lot, and there's still a lot more that I could talk about. But mostly it would really just be nitpicks, subjective opinions, or small growing pains that would be worked out in future games from the series. For example, Killer Croc's section in the sewer got a little tedious, and the collectibles, while unlocking really cool lore and background, were also a bit tedious, and hunting them felt underwhelming. I would also like to give a shout out to their Rogues Gallery choices. They used just enough top-level baddies while leaving out plenty of important options for future games, giving us enough to satisfy a rabid Batman fan, while keeping us hungry for more. One final note I'll make before I get to the conclusion is on the scale. Asylum has always stood out for me in the Arkham series because of its structure and scale. Moving forward, this series will become open world and will do away with the Metroidvania style structure. While exciting for its own reasons, this does change the scope and identity of the game in ways that aren't necessarily worse, but I think I prefer a more intimate scale of the first game and the level of character and detail it afforded the environment. I was a little scared to start this project. As I mentioned at the top, this series has always held high praise in my heart, so when I finished up Miles Morales and my brain couldn't help but make comparisons to Arkham, I knew I had to give this a go, but went in with worried expectations that, as usual, my nostalgia was clouding my memories. Well, I'm so very happy to say that my worries were unfounded. Batman Arkham Asylum is still a wonderful experience that gamers and comic fans alike should all have the pleasure of enjoying, showing a clear vision through and through, an exciting story, and compelling gameplay. Arkham Asylum absolutely still holds up. If you're still here, I just want to give a huge thank you for watching. This was by far one of the biggest projects I've ever undertaken, and as a result of a lot of hard work and a lot of love. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you like this, please leave a like and feel free to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. I do plan on playing the other two games in this series, and I'll probably combine them two in kind of one follow-up video for my next one. And I am definitely thinking of other games that I'd like to maybe revisit from my past. I'm kind of an older guy now, so I've played quite a few, and I'd love to go back to some of the games that I loved in the past. And if you have any suggestions, please absolutely leave them in the comments. I'd love to know what you guys would like to see. Also, please don't forget to check me out on Twitch. Link is below. All of my footage was recorded there. I stream there pretty much every day. And I play all kinds of things there, from old classics to new hotness. So yeah, come check me out. Anyways, thanks again. And in the words of LL Cool J,